Welcome to See You on the Other Side, where the world of the mysterious collides with the world of entertainment. A discussion of art, music, movies, spirituality, the weird, and self-discovery. And now, your hosts, musicians and entertainers who have their own weakness for the weird, Mike and Wendy from the band Sunspot.
We are live from the Sunspot van, rolling as we speak.
Yep, rolling through the dusty highways of Texas.
I just saw a tumbleweed go
did.
by. No, I didn't.
A tumbleweed just slapped me in the face. And happy birthday to you, Wendy.
Thank you.
It's a special day today.
Yes, it is. Thanks very much.
So we're rolling back from Austin, Texas. Went down there during South by Southwest. We play at the Sweet Music Madness ATX Festival.
Yes,
And,
what a blast.
Yeah, had a great time. Also doing haunted activities. We visited haunted bars in New Orleans, a haunted live stream. Hopefully you guys saw that. It's still on our Facebook.
The Paranormal pub crawl
That's right.
from New Orleans when we went and visited a number of locations.
Yeah, Jackson Square, St. Louis Cathedral, Muriel's, and
Pat O'Brien's.
Pat O'Brien's. Yeah,
Yes.
that's haunted by the ghost of Ray Walston from My Favorite Martian. The fact that they're like, well, we think it's Ray Walston from My Favorite Martian is my particular favorite.
And I confirm that the attendant in the bathroom has witnessed strange things.
Paranormal activity?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we had a great time doing that. Last night in Austin, we did some special paranormal investigation, and we're gonna have a video for you guys to watch later about that. We hung out with our friends in Strange Town again.
Yes, Billy and Mark. We had so much fun meeting them in person.
Well, and then going through a couple of paranormal and
Right.
having a little investigation.
Yeah, and they just told us a bunch of really cool stories of experiences they had while filming their TV show Strange Town, which is on PBS in Texas.
Yeah.
And also on YouTube, I believe. So
Yeah, you can find all the episodes. We'll
Yeah.
probably link to it in the show notes, othersidepodcast.com/136.
Yeah, so we're in the van now, and just to set up the scene. Mike and I are in the back seat. Oh, and it's our new van that we just got.
Big Blue.
So we're excited about that. But we've got our friend Stuart at the helm. Stuart, would you like to say hello to the podcast?
Hello, podcast people.
And then we have Joe,
Cactus
otherwise
Joe.
known as Cactus Joe, otherwise known as Roadie Joe.
Hello. I was the one who saw the most ghosts.
He did.
We'll put some of Joe's ghost pictures up on the site in the show notes, and you can see a little bit of the trip. But before Wendy and I took the party on the road down to Austin, New Orleans, Nashville for South by Southwest this year, we did it. Allison and I interviewed Lopaka Kapanui from Haunted Hawaii.
All right.
So he does the Mysteries of Hawaii Ghost Tour, and he really has a great stories, and it really was a fun interview.
And we talked to Allison about her tour when she was there. That was
Right.
with him, right?
Yeah, so
Cool.
This is kind of Allison's description of Haunted Hawaii is kind of Haunted Hawaii 101, and Lopaka provides us with the advanced class.
All right. Well, I'm excited to hear this, and it's going to put me in a tropical kind of mood. So.
I hope it, well, as we head back from 80-degree weather to 30-degree weather,
Yes.
let's get in that tropical mood. Lopaka Kapanui is a native Hawaiian who runs Mysteries of Hawaii Ghost Tours. He's a writer, actor, and master storyteller who joins us today from the island of Oahu. Aloha, Lopaka, and mahalo for agreeing to share some of your stories with us. We're also joined by Allison from Milwaukee Ghosts today. How you doing, everybody?
Hey,
Aloha, good morning.
aloha! I'm so happy that you're on with us today, Lopaka, because when we met, when was that? That's back in 2015, right?
Right.
And I was just so captivated by you and your stories, and just always wanted to get you on the podcast. We'll link in the show notes to an earlier podcast that we did on my trip to Hawaii, but that was really the highlight of the trip. Meeting you and your wife Tanya.
Right. It was. I have to say, it was one of the best personal tours that I've given in a while. And the interesting part about it, and Allison, maybe you can talk about it, is how when we went to the cave and your husband's camera sort of did strange things or wouldn't do anything at all.
Right. Well, yeah. Can you give a little background about the cave that you took us to?
Yep. In our folklore, the cave belongs to a shark god that was part man and part shark. And the long and short of it is he was what we call an aikanaka, a man eater. And in his human form, he seemed not to be a threat at all. But then he would warn people about not going to swim because there might be sharks, and they'd go anyway. Then they'd come back later that day, and there'd be 2 or 3 of them missing. And it turns out the very guy that was warning them was the shark god himself. And so over the years, the cave has sort of become like a repository of all these psychic thumbprints, these impressions, these things that have happened. So there's not only ancient things that happen in the cave, but more modern things that go on. Depending upon the type of people who go into the cave, depends upon what decides to manifest themselves, in front of those people, or follows them home for that matter.
So, does this shark god have a name that we can say?
Yeah, his name is Nanaue.
Thank you for sharing that.
The shark god, is it like a shark, or is it like a man/shark, or like, so what's the shark god? What does he look like?
He would look like just an everyday person, but you would have to get him to turn around so you could look at his back, because that's where the mouth is hidden. And so for this particular person, Nanaue, his mother made him wear sort of a little cape so that nobody would see the mouth on his back. And in some family traditions, we have a ceremony called Unihipili. So if our family is the shark god, when one of you would die, we would do this ceremony that we would deify you to become a protective shark deity. And so a lot of times when certain types of sharks would appear, the family would recognize it as the protector. But I think I mentioned this when Allison was here with her husband, that it's only that shark that's your protector, which means you can't jump into a school of sharks and expect not to be attacked, because you will be.
Right. Don't go surfing and just expect, look, hey, don't worry about that shark out there. That's like my great-great-grandfather. He's got a mouth in his back, but that's just for fun.
So as we're going through Lopaka, I know that, and a lot of our podcast listeners know that I teach at a Native American school. And I know that in that world, respect is very important. And, I get that same feeling from you that certain things that we're going to be talking about today, we need to be respectful towards them. And so, if you just guide us in that regard, and if I ask for a name or something and it's not appropriate, just let me know and we won't be offended.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sure.
No, I'll take it to the edges of blasphemy, but we're not going to be never bothered if you say, like, you know what, hey, come on, man, that's perfectly fine. It's all right.
Yeah, Mike's gonna take it to the edge.
That's where I go.
What he does.
No problem.
That's his gift. So yeah, we're in this cave, and it was just an incredible experience. Lopaka and his wife were just taking us around to all these sacred spots around the island of Oahu. And I just really cherished that night, I got to tell you.
Okay, well, let's set that up. If people haven't heard that last episode, because last episode came out like 15 months ago. But what happened was you guys met. You took the Mysteries of Hawaii, which is a ghost tour and sacred places tour around. And what island is it? Is it Oahu?
Well, yeah, we were on Oahu, and we actually took the Honolulu walking tour. Okay. He has a lot of different tours available.
So for people who might not know Hawaii, now there's a series of, it's a series of islands. Most Americans, at least, were hopefully taught that at some point in their life.
Get out a map, people.
Right. But,
Google Maps.
But you might not be familiar with all the different islands. So, like, if people are familiar with Hawaii, or they're thinking about Magnum PI, that's their experience with Hawaii, or Lost, or Hawaii 5-0, like, which of
TV is our schema.
Which of the islands, are we talking about, and what cities are on that island, just to make it familiar for people who might not have been there. Like, I've never been there yet.
Yeah. So we're talking about the island of Oahu, which is basically the main island where everything happens, and all the other islands are sort of like outback country. Not as developed as Honolulu, where the main city is at. So that's where Alice and her husband were at when we met them.
Okay. Yeah, and it shouldn't be confused with the Big Island, because it is the main island. Oahu is, in terms of development, but it's not the largest of the island.
Well, that was my next question, because somebody's like, well, it's on the Big Island, and I always assume the Big Island equals the main island, but that's not the case.
That's not the case. So yeah, and that's where Honolulu is located. That's also where many of the TV shows that you mentioned, like Lost, for example, were filmed. And so, as I said, Lopaka offers a lot of different tours, and we had originally gone on his Honolulu walking tour, right? Is there an official name for it?
Oh, Ghosts of Old Honolulu.
Ghost of Old Honolulu. So we went on that, and then of course, I'm always introducing myself to people and giving out cards for the Milwaukee Ghost Tour because Milwaukee, that's like the second destination. After you've been to Honolulu, you want to make sure you get to Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
Everybody wants to go to a dilapidated Rust Belt city. That's the first thing. Like, now that I've seen beauty, can you show me an abandoned factory?
Yes. Can you show me urban blight? It's kind of like, the two sides, on the continuum of life. But yeah, so then after we met, Lopaka was just so friendly, and he invited us to come out and see some sacred sites around the island of Oahu. So one of the sites he took us to was this sacred cave, and the coolest part of that, well, I don't know, there's lots of
coolest part is the shark god right there.
Yeah, well, okay, let's get that straight. But did you sing there? I know that for some of the sites you sang for permission. I'm not sure if you.
Yeah, it's in Hawaiian. It's called an uli, or a chant, and the chant is offered before you enter a sacred place to basically announce who you are, if you have any familial ties to that location, and also to ask for permission to enter, but also to ask for protection for yourself. For myself as the host, for instance, and for you, your husband, and for my wife. And what normally happens, it sounds strange, but I will receive a telepathic message that it's okay to enter, take as long as you want, or sometimes the message will be, okay, you got 5 minutes.
And that was the case. The shark god wasn't sure.
The shark god didn't want a bunch of Polacks sitting in his cave.
That's right. He's like, get these Polacks out of here. Well, we look tasty.
Right.
Like Polish sausage. But yeah, so we had 5 minutes, and we went in, and so for me, the exciting part was that I saw something. For Scott, the exciting part was that he has his camera out, and it was just working outside. And we get in the cave, and he just can't get it to work at all. And then we left the cave. As soon as he got out across the threshold, it worked again. So we don't know what was happening there. But I can share, too, that so we're looking around the cave, and I thought I saw something move, in the corner of my eye, in the upper part of the cave. I thought I saw something, and I looked, and I was going to disregard it because we had flashlights, of course, and because it's, dark, there's no
How
lighting.
big is the cave?
Yeah, I mean, floor to ceiling, it's pretty big, but as far as, the length of the cave, it's really not that big.
It's not that deep, but it is high.
It is high, but it's, like I said, it's a repository of psychic energy. And so there's constantly things going on in there that a lot of times you don't expect to happen. But go ahead.
Yeah, so I saw something out of the corner of my eye, and, I would have just discounted it because, like I said, we have flashlights. We're waving them up and down the walls of the cave, and I thought, well, I must have just caught, I saw a light, and it must have just been somebody's flashlight, that went up a little high. But then you looked at me, Lopaka, and then you said you saw something, didn't you? And so let's unpack that a little bit, because I'm not sure what happened there, because like I said, I was going to discount it, but because of your reaction, then I didn't.
Well, real quick, so I'm just trying to picture it visually. You guys are in kind of a shallow but high cave. And it's
Right.
dark in there. So how big is the entrance when you think about? Look, what time of day is this?
It's night.
Okay, so you're
It's like
nighttime.
It's dark. It's like, I don't know, 10, 11, maybe.
So there's no natural light coming in the entrance.
No.
Not at all.
So all you guys have are your flashlights.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And the inside of the cave, when I think of a cave, I think of like a slimy inside, well, especially near the ocean, and Hawaii is pretty near the ocean.
Yeah.
So what's the inside of the cave like? Like, what's the surface?
You go ahead, Allison. We'll work off of your memory.
Well, I didn't find it slimy at all. I don't know if I actually touched the walls. As far as how high it is above me, it just very, very high, wide cave entrance. And I don't know how many feet that would be. I don't want to misjudge and say something really huge.
But that's a high cave.
It's like cathedral. It's like a yeah. I'm just gonna describe it like that. It's cathedral-esque, and I was hoping it went really deep inside, and we'd go through all these winding caverns. But no, it is very shallow in that sense. I mean, it's not like a grotto. I mean, there is, you can go a little bit further back. But yeah, it's not something where you're gonna get lost in it.
But the only light you have is flashlights.
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's right. And I saw something glimmer to the side of me, up and to the side. And I just thought that was unusual. And especially unusual because Lopaka seemed to notice something as well. And so I want you to elaborate, Lopaka, on anything you might have noticed.
So even though we only have flashlights and it's, pretty dark outside of that, I don't know if I've got some sort of ability or something, but when I'm in the cave, especially on those occasions where the psychic energy, for lack of a better term, is potent, I don't know if it's hyper focused or hyper sensitive, but even without looking at Allison, I could see something about her body language that indicated that she did see something, and that happens a lot. And so that's why I asked her, or I said, you saw something, didn't you? Because there's a certain type of body language that happens when people are in that cave, that indicates to me that they either saw something or something either walked up behind them and, said something to them.
Yeah. So I'm curious, though, as to what other people have seen. Like I said, I just saw a glimmer and I wondered, so you get telepathic messages, from spirit, which, I understand now that I've had a little bit more experience, what that might be like. Although I haven't had extensive experience in that area, but, I've certainly felt like I'm getting messages that I need to listen to from certain things in the environment. But I'm just curious about like what you have seen or what it's like for you. If it's sensory? For me, it's not something that's sensory. It's something different. It's just a feeling, and then it kind of unfolds over days, or it's a thought that comes to me that doesn't seem to be my own. But I'm curious about what it's like for you, and what you've seen and heard in that location.
For myself, I'll share this with you because I like you guys already.
Oh, thank you. Well, we like you too.
Everything I've learned as a native Hawaiian cultural practitioner was taught to me and passed down to me from my mother and my aunt. And learning these things, one of the things they emphasized is that we as native Hawaiians were connected to our environment. Always have to realize that our ancestors are literally walking side by side with us. And, that's basically what's happening when I offer a prayer. The ancestors begin to communicate. And like I said, sometimes they'll say 5 minutes and sometimes they'll say not tonight. And it depends upon the type of moon phase that's prevalent as to whether we can enter or can't. And so when I walk into the cave, I'll see people from ancient times, some of the deities that reside in the cave, or I'll also see people who died in more recent times, within the last 20 to 30 years. So I grew up with this understanding that the ancestors are like right next to you. There's really no veil. And then in 2008, a guy gives me his iPad Nano, I guess, and there's a podcast on it. He says, listen to this. And I forget who the people were. I think it was Donna Stewart that was hosting the show. But long story short, they had a guy that they were talking to, and turns out that's Lloyd Auerbach.
Oh yeah.
And Lloyd's the balls.
And we should certainly link to that podcast you did with him, Mike.
Yeah, and Lloyd's going to be in Chicago this year, so I can't wait to meet him. in
Oh,
person.
nice.
Awesome. So I was completely blown away because here was a completely non-Hawaiian academic explanation of everything that I've been experiencing in my life, especially when he talks about the conscious surviving the physical death of its own body and everything. It entirely Western, but it made sense. It brought home the point that I'm not crazy.
Yeah.
And that really opened up my world and explained especially a lot of what happens in the cave, and it helps me to deal a lot more effectively with those things culturally.
When you were talking about how you had these, you learned a lot from your mother and your aunt. Like, when did you start maybe having, like you saying that you don't know if it's a sixth sense, but you can tell maybe when people have had an experience, or now that you've been around so many people that have had experiences probably on your tours and these locations. When was the first time you noticed something happening to you that was supernatural?
When I was 6 years old, I was adopted, but I knew my biological mother, the one we're talking about, my whole life. And I had to go to a place called Children's Hospital here to get my kidneys cleaned out. And during my stay in that hospital, my adopted father's mom would come every single day, sit down, and we would talk, and she'd tell me about those stories growing up in the plantation days. And at one point, a bunch of us were bored, and one of the kids snuck in a bottle of Coca-Cola. And so we hid down the stairwell, and we all shared a bottle of Coke. Well, I almost died that day. Yeah. And I remember while I was on the table, I know an operation was going on, something was happening. But right on the perimeter of where I was laying in the room getting the surgery or whatever, there was my adopted father's mom. There was a little boy who, at the beginning of the month, he was staying next to me in that hospital room, and he died. And I remember after he died, he wanted to come and play with me, and I was going to let him jump on the bed. And my adopted father's grandmother told me, no, he's actually not alive, and if you play with him, you'll never come back. So he was there, and then there was a voice in Hawaiian that kept asking the boy and my grandmother in Hawaiian, what will it be? Will he live or will he die? And who will speak for him? And so my adopted grandmother says, I will speak. The decision is that he should live. And so I get better, and when it's time for me to go home, on the way home, I'm telling my adopted parents, so by the way, Grandma came every day and talked to me, and we hung out. And they didn't say anything. We got home, and my adopted father went in the room and brought out a picture of adopted grandmother and said, is this what she looked like? I said, yeah, that's exactly what she wore. And come to find out, during my stay in the Children's Hospital, she'd actually passed away. And
Wow.
they didn't want to tell me because they didn't want to make me upset. And so after all of that happened is when all these strange things started to happen. I would see things, hear things, see people. And finally
Wait, she passed away, but so she was appearing while
Yes.
she was already on the other side.
already on the other side.
Oh, that story is, it's obviously very tragic, but what a great story. Yeah.
So
That's
it was only
like Sixth Sense.
Yeah, that's awesome.
that because it seems to me that you did not recognize that she had passed.
No.
Did you? I mean, you thought she was there
hanging out.
like the others. Yeah.
Because a lot of times I would be given medication to take in the morning, and when I'd wake up, she'd be sitting there. And she would talk about growing up during the plantation era and, the things that she experienced, just everyday conversations. But after all of that happened, when I began to have experiences, I think it's because I almost died. My biological mother, tells me, even back then, she says, it's not because of anything religious. You're not being influenced by evil or the devil. She said, it's because you're Hawaiian. And she said, and our people are closely connected to our environment, spiritually, physically. And she told me, when you get older, we'll sit and we'll talk more about it.
Wow.
Yeah. And so that's how it all started.
Well, and I think that a lot of people can have experiences, and when you come from the dominant culture, you feel the influence of the dominant culture. Materialism, reductionism. You feel crazy. I think. I mean, because you don't know. Well, how can I reconcile this with what the greater world is, or the modern world? All these value judgments, which really don't hold to reality, is saying to you. So you're looking at the dominant culture, and you don't quite fit. But I think over here too, lots of people will have experiences like that, and they're not sure what to do with it. And for me, what I've come to realize is that there's many ways that you can look at the world, and many gifts, from each of those viewpoints. And so the way I see it now is that, okay, yes, it's going to sound crazy when I tell certain stories to the dominant culture, to people who ascribe to that. But for myself, I need to decolonize my belief system and realize that I can choose, and there's much more out there than the materialists would have us believe.
Well, I think, Allison, too, at the same time, though, we're so, this is also a very polarized time where if you have some kind, we talk about being, I think it's amazing, the idea of a culture being close to the land and being connected to a place. Because while there are certain places that I feel are sacred to me that I love and and then I enjoy there, or I take them seriously inside. You know how the sacred is, you take it seriously inside when you're there, and you're like, I'm going to appreciate this, I'm going to do it. But then it hasn't been for generations, or like Hawaiian sacred places, like you guys have had it for. So when you're talking to your grandmother, you're talking to your mother, they have generations behind it. That make that kind of place sacred, and it's amazing. And so there's a connection to a place and a connection to the spirit of the place that a lot of us in regular, we think of mainstream culture, don't get to have, because it's just everything's too new. And at the same point, when you try to talk about that, it's too much like, well, you sound like a fundamentalist, or you sound like a hippie, or you sound like everything. So all this stuff you can't the hard part is the polarization and politicization of everything, where we can't just say, like, you know what, it's okay to feel this connection, it's okay to feel spiritual, and it's okay to enjoy video conferencing with people halfway around the world too. They don't have to be mutually exclusive.
Right. And, Lopaka, I'm just really thrilled that, we've made this connection. And there are people from this culture, from the dominant culture, who, can be appreciative of, the things that Hawaiian culture offers, like Glenn Grant, for instance. Let's talk a little bit about him. And one of the reasons I was so excited to go on your Honolulu tour was, in reading that it was the original Oahu Ghost Tour, and remembering Glenn Grant, who was a collector of stories in Hawaii since 1971.
That sounds like a superhero secret identity name.
Yeah, well, it reminds us. Yeah, that's true. It reminds me of Richard Crowe here in the States, in Chicago, and he was somebody who started ghost tours in Chicago in 1973, and that inspired Mike and I to do the same. So when I think of Glenn Grant, I think of him as the Richard Crowe of Hawaii.
So Glenn Grant, in his own words, he used to say, "I'm just a Jewish kid from Hollywood," but he's from Culver City. His father is one of the guys who put together this robot that would be a part of a TV series called Lost in Space.
What? Oh, Robbie.
Oh, Danger Will Robinson.
Sweet.
Right, and they use that robot in a whole bunch of movies and TV series. Mm-hmm. And Glenn Grant says his next door neighbor was Rin Tin Tin.
Oh,
Wow.
sure.
Right. And so one day he says he and his friends are playing in his little plastic pool, and the dog Rin Tin Tin jumps over the fence, jumps in the pool, the kids scatter, and Glenn's left by himself, and he gets mauled by Rin Tin Tin. And
Oh,
Not
no.
so friendly now, Cujo.
and so he says when he finally gets out of the hospital, his older brother and sister take him, wounded and everything, sit him on a chair in the front yard and charge everybody 5 cents to look at my brother who got mauled by the movie star.
It's like early
Well,
TMZ.
there you go.
It's like early TMZ.
Turn it into opportunity.
But this is going to make sense to you, and I'll try to give you the edited version. So Glenn's best friend, who was responsible for bringing Glenn to Hawaii, is Dr. Dennis Ogawa, professor of American history. And Dr. Ogawa grew up the street from the Santa Monica Pier, and his father owned the business on the whole block. And after World War II, that whole thing happened. And Dr. Ogawa says, every time they'd hang out at the pier, they used to see this kid just sitting by himself or, eating by himself. Somebody tells Dr. Ogawa, well, Dennis Ogawa, why don't you go tell that kid to come over? He's always by himself. Tell him to hang out with us. And Dennis Ogawa says, no. We bring that guy over here. We let him hang out. We feed him. He's going to be like a dog. He'll keep coming back. He'll never go away. And so, long story short, Glenn Grant and Dennis Ogawa become really best friends. So when Dr. Ogawa gets an opportunity to come to University of Hawaii, he brings Glenn over. And Glenn himself, and this is his face-to-face story that he's telling me, aside from the one that's printed in his book. He said he's living in a dilapidated old shack down the road from the University of Hawaii with 4 other guys, they're candidates for their doctorates. And he said the first week they live there, they wake up every night because somebody's in the kitchen slamming the drawers, shaking up all the cutlery, making a whole
Somebody.
bunch of... Yeah. They all wake up late at night and there's nobody in the kitchen. And he says about a week later, one of the guys comes home early from a class and he's taking a shower. And the shower curtain's very clear, but he can see a silhouette coming toward him and he figures it's his girlfriend. So he opens the shower curtain and he says somebody open hand slaps him right across the face.
Oh, that sounds like my girlfriend.
So he washes.
You deserve it, Mike.
Yep.
He washes the soap off his face and he sees that the bathroom door is locked from the inside. Nobody's in there. And Glenn Grant says a short time after that, he comes home from a class with his girlfriend, and his roommate Thomas down the hallway sleeps on a military cot with the military blanket. And he says Thomas is coughing really badly. Sounds like he's going to choke up a lung. And so he opens the door. He says, I got to tap my friend on the foot, even though the blanket's covering him. He says when he touches the blanket, it just falls flat. There's nobody on the cot. So all the guys got the landlord to come over, the older Japanese lady, and individually they tell her about all their experiences. The old Japanese lady, who's the landlord, smiles and says, oh, I forgot to tell you guys.
Ah.
The woman who lived in this house before you, her husband fooled around. He cheated. And so she hung herself in the kitchen. She hates men.
There's got to be some kind of legal disclosure about that. Like,
That's
hey,
right.
this is a suicide man-hater.
So Glenn says after that, within 6 months, every single guy that lived in that house, they all died one by one in these really bad car accidents. And he said the only person that survived their car accident, Glenn Grant said, was his.
Wow.
Yeah, he walked away with a scratch over his head. So that was the beginning of his interest in, local folklore and Hawaiian supernatural beliefs.
Wow.
Yeah, because that one's terrible. Because that's like, that's a really bad run of luck.
Yeah. Well, the Rin Tin Tin thing is going to make sense to you because after Glenn began doing ghost tours in the late 70s, he ran into this girl who was possessed by what the Japanese call the Inugami, or the Japanese dog demon, and that she'd actually physically attacked him. And
he's like, if I can handle Rin Tin Tin, I can handle you.
well, it actually psychically and emotionally scarred him pretty bad.
Oh.
And she returned back to Hawaii because she left after that. and started to stalk him. And he didn't know it was her because, she lost some weight, changed her hair color. He says the only reason he finally recognized the fact that this was the same woman who used to be the possessed girl that attacked him was, he said, during the time that she was possessed by this Japanese dog demon, she tore off all of her fingernails. Yeah. I mean, right in front of him and his, the girl's father and the Japanese priest. So now here she is a few years later as an adult woman. As he's talking to her, he realizes there's all these funny looking scars underneath her fingernails. And he's like, oh my God, that's the person. And so she actually physically attacked him and stabbed him with the scissors. And he actually showed me the wound.
Oh, man. Glenn and women.
Yeah. So he said, I don't know what it is. Every place I go, I encounter something that has to do with a dog spirit, a dog demon. Or in the case of the other tour that Allison went on, there's what we call a kupua, a demigod that's part man, part dog, and his name is Kaupe. And Kaupe is like a protective deity that used to help people who were lost, but somewhere along the line, the legend becomes misconstrued. They say because of the influence of the missionary beliefs that Kaupe suddenly became a cannibal dog. And so Glenn Grant had an encounter with this being called Kaupe, and it's on the windward side of the island, and there's a bridge that nobody likes to drive over anywhere past 2:00 in the morning.
And let's talk about the windward and the leeward, because if you haven't been on the island, you probably don't. That people probably don't know, what that means. So the leeward
is
a
ship. What is
yeah,
it, a ship
the
we're talking
leeward
about?
is dry. It's very desert like, surprisingly so. And then the windward is tropical jungle, just so lush and incredible.
Yeah.
Did I describe it correctly?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And I have to also add a note in that, when I was there in Hawaii, hearing about these dogman legends there was incredible, because we have our own dogman here in Wisconsin, the Bray Road Beast. And it just sounded so similar, the idea that along the road you might meet this beast, and you might be driving by and catch him in the car headlights, which is very, very like descriptions here in Wisconsin of the Bray Road Beast.
Right. And in that area are petroglyphs of this demigod, this deity, this dog man. And so it traces itself back to ancient times, and a lot of Hawaiians believe even before the migration of the first Polynesians to come to the archipelago, that he had already been here.
So when they showed up, the dogman was there, waiting.
Yeah. So originally, in traditional Hawaiian belief, how do you say his name again? Kaupe?
Oh, yeah, Kaupe.
Kaupe, he was a protective spirit.
Yeah.
Or a demigod. And, could you describe a little bit more about him and the people's interactions with him even today?
It plays into even werewolf lore, because he's, animal on top, human being on the bottom. And I'll tell you, the most recent encounter of Kaupe was in the 70s. Retired police officer Gary Diaz records in one of his books that he and 6 other police officers are called to Waiahau Church, the oldest church in downtown Honolulu, the one we went to on the tour.
Oh,
sweet.
And the alarm company has called the police, and they're saying, brand new gymnasium on the church grounds, brand new court. We can hear somebody walking around that sounds like claws, and he's howling like a wolf inside the gym, and the people are complaining. So Gary Diaz says they meet the caretaker. They're walking across the graveyard, officers, 6, 7 abreast. And he says all of a sudden the front door to the gymnasium, which is actually locked by a padlock, it bursts open. And Gary says the toughest police officer in front of him drops to his knees and starts praying the novena. He says because this massive creature that was animal on top, human on the bottom, bounded out of the doors from the gym, jumped over the police officers, and jumped onto the roof of the church, which is pretty high. And then it turned around and looked at them, and the eyes started to glow red, and then it disappeared.
Yeah,
so
screw that.
Right. And so Gary Diaz asked, I've heard these legends about Kaupe, but why would he be at a downtown church in the middle of Honolulu? Well, that church used to be an old Hawaiian temple, the Heiau. The funny thing about our culture was sort of like the Egyptians. When royalty is buried, we also have those guardian spirits, those beings that are sort of put there with them, stand as guardians. And I said to the officer, I said, I'm not sure, but either the royalty that's buried on the grounds of this church might have had guardian deity that was, half animal, half human being, or it could very well be Kaupe himself, because there are lava tubes that come down from where he's seen outside of Honolulu, right underneath the palace grounds and underneath the church. So who knows?
Now, did Glenn have, did he collect any stories of Kaupe or have his own interactions?
Yeah, he writes about being in a place called Kipapa Gulch. And he writes about hearing his name being called as if somebody's asking for help. And when he goes to investigate a few times, there's nobody there. And all of a sudden, he's attacked and knocked down by this creature that he can only describe as half human, half dog. And he can actually hear it growling, the breath on the back of his neck.
So Glenn himself had that experience?
I believe, no, I stand corrected. It was an experience he wrote about in his first book that happened to someone else. But the thing with Glenn, a lot of times, is people in Hawaii are funny. So he either had to change the names or the locations because people didn't want to be
associated with St. Dogman.
Yeah, being crazy.
Yeah.
And a lot of these times, these were Glenn's own personal experiences, which he sort of altered,
right,
for personal reasons.
Now, so Glenn, he is somebody that was famous beyond Hawaii in that he appeared on a very popular paranormal radio show, Coast to Coast AM, and I remember listening to Glenn Grant's, as he called them, chicken skin stories. Way back when Art Bell was the host, and then I think the last time he was on there was 2002. Now, how did you get involved with Glenn and become the heir to his legacy?
I was dancing hula for my cousin, and one night he says to us, and it's all guys because men were the ones who danced hula, women were not allowed back in the day. And he says, we're going to do a ghost tour out to the Leeward Coast, out to Waianae with my friend. And he never said who his friend was. And a week later, I go on the downtown ghost tour, and there's this guy who's talking about all these things that I heard about growing up. And so that sort of gave it validation. At the end of the tour, he introduces himself as Glenn Grant. So the following week at the hula class, my cousin says, oh, don't forget, we're doing the ghost tour out to Waianae with my friend Glenn Grant. And so we participated in part of that tour. My cousin co-hosted the tour. And one year, my cousin couldn't make it. And so Glenn said, well, who's going to do Keone's part? Because I don't know the Hawaiian part. And my cousin Keone says, well, Lopaka can do it because he's good at, hearing, seeing, and retaining information. So I did the tour, and that was Saturday. And I remember Monday, Glenn called me and said, hey, that was really good. You did really well. And he says, I love your cousin a lot. Please don't say anything to him, but it was a lot better than than he did it. And he said, if I gave you some more work, would you mind? I said, yeah, sure. And so that eventually led to Glenn mentoring me into doing these ghost tours. And when it was finally official, he was hosting a book signing in his old store, and he stopped everything and he says, everybody, I want all of you to know I now have a Hawaiian who can do these tours, because Glenn said, really, it's supposed to be a Hawaiian person doing it, not him. And I'm looking around the store for the Hawaiian person that Glenn Grant is talking about. And he says, it's Lopaka. I'm like, what? He says, yeah, well, he wanted to concentrate on radio shows and writing more books. And
Sure.
That's basically how it started. The reason I honor him so much as I can is because one thing happened. During the time that I knew him, I was out of work for about 6 months. It was hard to find a job. I wasn't happy where I was teaching at. And I don't know how Glenn found out, but he showed up at my apartment one day and rung the doorbell. I opened it and I says, hey, boss, what are you doing here? And he hands me a blank check. And he says, I know you're having a hard time, so, go ahead and take care of your family. And I blank check, and I says, well, I can't pay you back because I'm not really getting that much off of unemployment. He says, I'm not worried about money. He said, don't worry about paying me back. Just fill it out for the amount you need and just take care of yourself and your family. He says, don't go crazy. But that pretty much, cemented my loyalty and my love for this guy.
Sure. And then when did we lose Glenn?
June 19th, 2003. He had already had 2 forms of cancer, so it didn't take long. Once he was finally diagnosed.
So you've been holding down the paranormal fort.
I guess so.
Yeah.
Since then.
Well, thank you for talking to us about Glenn. I mean, I really, enjoyed hearing him on Coast to Coast, and I'm so happy that you're carrying on his legacy. Now, you mentioned in there that you were a teacher. What were you teaching at the time?
I was teaching at a Hawaiian language immersion school, so it's regular curriculum, but being taught entirely in the Hawaiian language.
Oh wow! So you were I teach 4th grade, so you were a teacher like I am right now, except in the language.
Yeah.
Incredible. And then a little bird told me that you were also at one time a pro wrestler. I thought Mike might like that.
I used to love wrestling. I still do. Well, I don't know any of the new guys, but I still love all the classic wrestlers.
Yeah. Who were the classic wrestlers? Paul Hogan, and who else?
Paul Hogan was Crocodile Dundee.
Oh no, not Paul Hogan. Not Paul. Okay, Paul Hogan. Sorry.
Yeah, Paul Hogan and Macho Dan. Get out of here.
Macho Dan. Okay, well, Mike, you got to step in.
Okay, well, no, I'm interested.
Favorites?
I'm interested. Like, how do you get into pro? Like, and we talked about that. You also do some acting and stuff. How did you get into talking about Hulk Hogan? There is what you meant by saying Paul Hogan. But that was when I was coming up. I would watch those wrestlers when I was a little kid. So how did you get involved in wrestling, Lopaka?
When I got involved in wrestling, the business was still tight. They had something called kayfabe, So it's like being a wrestling magician, suspending disbelief, that whole thing. A nephew of mine put me in a figure 4 leg lock.
Oh yeah.
And I had to find out how he did it. And once, instead of going to watch wrestling on TV to find out how he did it, I decided the way to get him back was to enroll in a professional wrestling school.
Nice.
And at that time, a woman by the name of Leah Maivia was in charge of the promotion. She was being assisted by a former member of the Minnesota Wrecking Crew, Lars Anderson. And I remember one day I had to meet the promoter, Leah, in downtown Honolulu to go have lunch and talk about a few business things. And she says, you know what, I don't like the food here, so I'm going to order from Kentucky Fried Chicken. I said, can you do that? You're in another person's restaurant. They said, no, they don't care. She says, I'm going to call my grandson. He'll come down. So the grandson comes down, very tall, good-looking, young Samoan, half African-American, and very polite. He says, sir, would you like something from KFC? I'd be more than glad to get it for you. I said, no, brother, I'm fine. He goes, okay. And then as he's walking out, the promoter goes, Dewey, come back, give grandma a kiss in Samoan. So he gives her a kiss. That kid was The Rock.
Oh, and his nickname was Dewey. That's the best.
Oh,
I love it.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, that's
The Rock.
That was The Rock.
Oh man, there are a lot of stories of The Rock in Hawaii that I've heard. Incredible guy.
They're all true.
So, did you have a wrestling name?
Yes, I wrestled under a mask for a while. The name was Black Rain.
Nice.
Black Rain.
And I was trained in what they now call the Japanese hard style. So not so much, the American pro wrestling style, but the Japanese strong style is a lot more contact.
Okay. Yeah, I heard when the wrestlers go over to Japan, like that's some brutal work they got to do.
Yeah, but it's the way you make your bones in the business. You gain respect, and so we were trained in Muay Thai kickboxing, Russian sambo wrestling, and the sensei who was teaching us was about 5 feet tall with a kendo stick and just mean as hell. but he
Just like
says,
me, 5 foot tall and mean as hell.
Yeah, that's how I describe
Yeah.
my sister.
but he told us, he says, the reason why I'm teaching you to fight for real first is, when you get to learn, well, basically the fake stuff, if somebody in the ring doesn't want to cooperate, you know what to do.
Mm.
Ah,
Yeah, because there's some
Nice.
guys who don't want to do the program and they want to shoot. And what a shoot is they want to do the hold for real. They want to punch you for real. But if you've got all these skills behind you, you basically know what to do to tie them up and just say, "Hey, are we going to make money? You're going to be an idiot."
Right.
wow. Just incredible. You have such a incredible backstory. Just
Has any of your
You-
wrestling, like,
yeah.
did you have any paranormal experiences related to wrestling? Did
Nice.
you ever
Yeah.
see like a dead person behind the wrestler? You're saying like, dude, I can see your grandma behind me, and even she wants me to kick your butt.
We had a match at the Marine base one time, and there were a bunch of old Marines who passed away, who were at the venue. You can go on the Mysteries of Honolulu fan page on Facebook, and I think you got to scroll down maybe back to January, and you'll see me in a real quick match where I'm wearing nice clothes, and the backstory behind that is Glenn Grant's former partner and ex-girlfriend. Every time I would have a wrestling match, and this is toward the very end of my career, I would always tell her, "Don't book the Ghost Tour on this Saturday because I got a wrestling match," and she booked it anyway. And so there's no way I could get out of it. So I got on the tour bus and I told these people, I said, "Listen, here's what's going on. I've been double booked, and there's a wrestling match happening about a couple of blocks away from here. So here's what's going to happen. The bus is going to roll into the parking lot. All of you are going to get on the bus. You're going to go into the place, sit in the front row. I'm going to go downstairs, talk to the booker. You're going to see me run in the ring. I'm going to win the match, and then everybody get out and go back to the bus."
Oh my God, that's like a twofer. You get a wrestling match
That's the greatest ghost tour in
and a
history.
ghost tour. I know, right? And you're hearing it here today. I mean, if you want the best ghost tour experience in Hawaii, you got to check out Lopaka, because not only is he gonna give you the real deal in terms of stories, but he also can protect you both from the spiritual and the physical.
He's gonna make the black rain fall down, brother.
That's right.
Yeah, so I get in there and they see me do my thing, and I get the 1, 2, 3, and they scoot out. They go back to the bus. I go downstairs, get my paycheck, and I get on the bus, and there's dead silence. And I grab the microphone. I said, "So is anybody going to give me a hard time?" And the whole bus just erupts.
No hecklers tonight.
That's
Put you in
fantastic.
the headlock. Put you in the
Just-
headlock.
Just one of those situations where I had to think on the fly.
Right. Well, that is
This
sweet.
video- That video.
Who wouldn't love that?
Well,
Yeah.
well. Speaking, we'll have to. I'll look for the video in the show notes, and we'll get that. And that'll be othersidepodcast.com/136. Now, before we move on to a couple last questions that I make sure we want to get to before we got to roll. Also, so if you've been doing some acting around Hawaii, I know they film a lot of stuff there because the jungle locations and the tropical area can really fill in for most of the world. Have you had a chance to like try out or be part of any cool stuff that's been filmed or taped in Hawaii?
I've been in 2 different episodes of Hawaii Five-0. I died both times.
Oh man, so you were like a heavy that got that's like were you a bad guy or a good guy or just a passerby?
One of those innocent guys that gets accidentally shot. So the good thing is I had dialogue. I've done 2 separate movies, both from a German film company. So that was released in Germany. And I forget entirely what it's called in German.
But was
I
it
think
was paranormal related or crime related or what kind of thing was it?
crime related. The first one I played the chief of police. And funny story is, while I'm filming, my wife texts me because we're in Maui, and she says, "I just got hit by a car." I'm like, "What?"
No.
Yeah, that's a whole other story. And the second one is I played an attorney for a guy who committed murder, and those are great experiences. And of
Wow.
course, a lot of Travel Channel stuff, mysteries at the museum, stuff
Mhm.
like that.
Oh, that's a lot of fun. Like what a beautiful area and what a lot of fun. Like especially, did you have to speak in did you have to speak in German or were you able to do it in English and then they just did the subtitles or whatever?
Yeah, I had to. They trained me to look for the last few lines in Germany, and that was my cue, German, and then my cue came after that, both in English and in Hawaiian.
Oh, so you get to do it. You get to actually perform in Hawaiian then too.
Yeah, most of the dialogue. The funny thing, it was, those German actors. They're really cerebral, so it was like being in a Bergman film,
Like an art film theme.
Yeah.
So, Lopaka, one other connection that I wanted to talk to you about, regarding Hawaiian stories, is you have something called a calling ghost. And we have some similar things going on here, perhaps locally. So, could you describe the calling ghost for us?
Well, the background of it is my mom always told us, if you're ever out late at night and you hear an unfamiliar voice calling your name, you're supposed to spit on the ground and swear and run for your life and certainly never answer.
Oh,
So
I do that anyway.
Right. But the calling spirit appears as a beautiful woman, and she only appears to men, and she calls them by their first name or by a name that nobody else knows them by except immediate family or close people. But she only calls the men from behind, never to their face. And there's been documented incidents of that throughout the ages until as recently as last year. And so what she's waiting for is for the man to answer, because that's why she's so beautiful. Because the man is so entranced and so hypnotized and curious as to how does Megan Fox know me by my first name?
Right.
Right? And so always the mistake the man makes is that he does answer. And so she uses her physical beauty to seduce him, because she can't do anything physical to him. And she's luring him to a place where he'll basically die, fall off a cliff, fall into a lava tube, get hit by traffic. That's basically the purpose of the calling spirit here.
So she's luring him into a fatal situation.
Absolutely.
And
there's
so
something to be said about fidelity in a relationship.
Right.
yeah, so is it always a man who is the victim of a calling spirit?
It's always a particular kind of man. It's a man who's got emotional and psychological issues, or a man who's just a real jerk. And when the calling spirit the man encounters a calling spirit at that point in his life, he's at a stage in his life where he's just inundated by negativity and his own stupidity. And that's basically the way she likes them. Damaged.
So here we have along along the Mississippi River, we have had a spate of deaths, specifically in the city of La Crosse, and they've all basically fit a certain profile where these are young, successful college students usually, who are lured somehow towards water, away from their friends. It's almost invariably a bar situation where they are with their friends at the bar, and then their friends lose track of them, and then they show up in the river days later, drowned.
And it's a funny thing because these guys are all like young, healthy,
athletic.
And I'd lived in La Crosse for a couple of years. I was working at the TV station there when a couple of these incidents had occurred. And I lived right by the river where these guys went in. And when I was living in Minneapolis, I lived right by the river where these guys went in. To go in isn't just a thing where like, whoops-a-daisy, I'm falling. It wasn't just like a little railing like it's a line at Disney World. This is, you got to jump over the bridge. And there's got to be a reason that these guys were jumping over the bridge. And people were saying there's a Mississippi River killer, that it's a serial killer kind of thing. But the idea of a calling spirit, because first of all, it'd be hard to overpower even intoxicated some of these young athletic men. And when you talk about that this beautiful woman entices them and tricks them, that's right up that alley.
Yeah, it has resonance here. And I'm just curious to think of, what you might think about that.
Well, we have a place here in Oahu called Lake Wilson, and it's right outside Schofield, the Army base. And just like what you're talking about, there's been a history of these young soldiers that go to a bar that's near Lake Wilson. And the next morning or a couple days later, they find the soldier's car parked at the lake, and they find the body of the soldier fully clothed, cell phone, wallet in the pocket. And the forensics guys have told me it almost seems as if the soldier willingly just walked into the lake and went willingly, but nobody can figure out why. But the Hawaiians know that Lake Wilson originally belonged to what they called a mo'owahine, a female water spirit who preys on specific kinds of men, and lures them.
That's exciting. Not exciting in the way like dead people sweet. Even though in our business it is dead people sweet.
Well,
But what's interesting is how cross-cultural that particular legend is. When you get the the Kelpie, the Celtic legend of the Kelpie, to we have the same kind of water spirit legends. The Lakota have a similar type of legend up by the upper Mississippi in the Minnesota area. And now we have these native Hawaiian legends, the same kind of, these female water spirits that just love killing dudes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
These particular soldiers have been through a couple of tours in the Middle East, and PTSD issues reacclimating themselves into modern society or whatever, and they disappeared, and they find them in a lake.
Yeah. And so there's so many bars out there near bodies of water where you don't find people. And then, in certain areas, it's like you can't keep people from going in. It's like there's something not quite right about that.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Just how localized it seems to be. And you just reminded me too of a story that we have in Milwaukee here that happened in the 1920s. And I just want to get your read on it. So there's this little boy who he had reported to his parents that he was being followed by a shadow. And so nobody saw it but him. He said it was like a white shadow that was following him. And then his father noticed that, he didn't want to go to bed, and he would be watching the corners and just terrorized. But the dad, eventually made him go to bed. And then this poor little child, just 9 years old, goes to bed. And then the father's awakened in the night by him calling out. And then he goes to see his little boy, and the boy is like in some kind of trance, relating to him, that he's swimming with the fishes, and also kind of yelling at the spirit, saying, "Oh, you can't get me, you can't fool me." And then the dad shakes him awake, and then, of course, the next morning, what do you got to do? You got to go to work. And that's what the dad did. He left his little boy in the care of a neighbor. And unfortunately, she lost track of him, and he ran off to Lake Michigan. And the investigators at the time also deduced that it seemed like, when they found his body, that what had happened to him is he dropped his pole and just walked into the water. And that was their assessment of what happened to this poor little boy. So I was curious about, in your cosmology, what do you think happened there? I know it's kind of a big question, but when I find these stories in local folklore, I'm like, whoa, come on now, something happened there.
Right.
I don't know what it is.
So during the plantation era here, I think it was about the 1920s or 30s, there's a newspaper article that came out, and it had to do with the island of Hawaii and a plantation village. This little boy was telling his parents that, he wanted to go play because the boy who lived by the pond wanted him to play. And, they didn't want to be bothered. And finally, they're like, yeah, go play. And so the boy goes off to play with his friend near the pond, and he doesn't come back. And so now there's a search party looking for this little boy that disappeared. And the next day they find him in the pond. And the pond is very clear. And the way they find him is he's sitting down, and I'm not trying to be disrespectful to anyone's culture, but this is what the newspaper article said. He's sitting down Indian style.
Sure.
Right underneath the surface of the water. Yeah. right underneath the surface of the water, you can see him sitting there, hands folded in his lap, and just staring out straight in front of him. But he's dead. He's drowned. But they said the position of the body and the expression on the face was as if he was having a conversation with someone.
So the idea that like someone's beckoning you, you know, like come into the lake. It's hey guy, it's okay. Come on into the pond. Everything's gonna be great. You know, that kind of thing. And
let's go play.
The fact that those kind of stories happen cross culture. That's why I get excited, because it's the idea that the fact that they show up, it's like the story of the flood shows up in all these different mythologies across the planet. Yeah. It's like the fact the story of the flood means, okay, it may not have been Noah and the ark and 2x2 and the animals on the boat, but
something happened.
It was wet for a while. All around the world, like what exactly happened, you know?
Right. It reverberates in folklore. It reverberates in history. And before we go, we have to talk about the fairies, because that's another cross-cultural thing. You guys have the Menehune over there. Did I say it right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Can you tell us some stories of the Menehune?
Who are the Menehune?
Who are the Menehune? In spite of what you might have seen on that TV program, Searching for Bigfoot, who came here, Menehune are not little Bigfoot people. So, oh my God. It is believed by the people who live on the Hawaiian island of Molokai, that they were the first people before the Polynesian migration from the south. And they believe that they are the survivors of the Pacific landmass called Lemuria, and that they are the Mu people. And so they're considered the first Hawaiians. And in our legends, when the mass migration came from Polynesia and the introduction of the royal class system and human sacrifice, those invading Polynesians called those first people who were on Molokai the Manahune, or the people with little power, you know, the diminished people. And so that's basically how that term was born. But the Menehune are people who are maybe about 3 feet tall but fully formed human beings. And their supernatural powers that they can build great structures in one single night. And that they're also able to help people who are, you know, deserving of their help. And they like to eat certain types of fish, a certain type of banana. And I was aware, as Glenn Grant was, of a Hawaiian family that still exists today. And their responsibility is 1 month out of the year, they set food out for the Menehune, who are making a journey from, you know, the big island where the volcano is, down the island chain, and the journey finishes on the island of Kauai. So every island has a family whose responsibility it is to set food out for the Menehune before they finally make it to Kauai. And on the island of Kauai, they have a place called the Menehune Fish Pond. And archaeologically, it's a wonder, because the stones are so perfectly cut and so perfectly fitted together that you can't even pass air or water through it. But it was done during a time when no one should have any types of tools to do.
And I think that's awesome. There's a couple connections there. Number one, now if you guys are familiar with the Song of Ice and Fire, George R. Martin, the Game of Thrones, that whole, the continent of Westeros, the idea is that the first people that lived there were the children of the forest. And so when the people came over from the first men, were started to colonize the north, they were running into the children of the forest, who were, like they were small, fairy-ish type creatures, you know, hobbitish, you know, type creatures. And they portray them almost fairy-ish in the TV show. But the fact is, the Menehune really, it sounds like the children of the forest were very influenced by that legend right there. That's interesting. And number two is, wasn't it in Polynesia a couple of years ago, or in the Pacific area, where they found the hobbit skeletons of an ancestor of humans who were, or a common ancestor that were like 3 to 4 feet tall?
That was actually in Indonesia.
Yeah, I was going to say.
And in 2003.
That would make sense, because they have found, and excuse me for being an idiot about this, but radiocarbon dating, or some sort of artifacts that were Polynesian, intrinsically Polynesian in Indonesia. And so some of the anthropology professors from UH surmise that maybe some of the Hawaiians might have come from that place.
Oh, wow.
Wow. So
yeah, it was on the island of Flores. So it's Homo floresiensis.
Yeah.
is the name of the new discovery in 2003, and called the Hobbit, nicknamed the Hobbit because of its diminutive stature. But this is something, this is a hominid that was about 3 feet tall. And, there's lots of stories of the little people of the forest still in Indonesia. And some scientists believe that, perhaps that line was still existent in modern times.
Yeah. Well,
we still
have menehune that exist today. There is a big suburban neighborhood called Ocean Point, and I still get calls every few months, from people who say we have little footprints in our ceiling. We hear kids scurrying around in the kitchen. We get down there, it's a big mess. The funny thing is, where this place Ocean Point was an ancient Hawaiian fishing village, and there happened to be a menehune procession that went through the village. So those people fed the menehunes during certain moon phases. And so I told them, if there's anything to this legend, then they must still be coming through here. But now the fishing village isn't around, and they're looking to still be fed. Last year I was at a home past Diamond Head, and the nice lady who owned the home let me host a 13 ghost story thing. And afterwards she said, there's menehune in my house, and it's a little dark-skinned brown person. It's a man, and the woman sometimes shows up, but only periodically. But she goes into the refrigerator and brings out these Haagen-Dazs ice cream bars.
As you do.
Well,
yes.
Menehune love Haagen-Dazs.
She hands them out, and she says, by the way, they happen to like these things when we leave them out. As she's talking, her house is behind her, and we're out on the veranda in the backyard. As she's saying this to us, I noticed movement behind her on her left, and it looked like a little Hawaiian child that scurried from the couch underneath the end table where the lamp was, and it sort of peeked out like this and then went like that. And she's saying, and I'm like, never mind. It's all right.
So you saw one.
Yeah, but I did not. I think I was not supposed to acknowledge, that I saw it.
Okay. So when you see something, you might not be supposed to tell the owner of the home.
Well, you don't want to freak them out, because they might never see it. So.
Well, what I was really worried about was the 40 people on my tour, bringing out their cameras and everything, and stampeding into the house
and being disrespectful.
Yeah, well, purely out of excitement, maybe not being disrespectful.
Well, right, should have busted it like, he saw a menehune, we going crazy.
Disrespect a lot of times is not intentional.
But I think that's interesting, just the idea. First of all, we talk about those hominids, like the nickname the Hobbit, the idea of almost that could be a genetic memory into our modern time, where it's like, yeah, of course we saw, and the idea that they might be I mean, that always was, when you think about the Icelandic sagas, elves are everywhere, all over Scandinavia.
Right.
People considered like magical, even though they obviously just regular people who just were small, but they gave them some kind of, the superstition was that they were magic. So humanity seems to have this preternatural inclination to think that little humans are magic.
Well, and that they're among us. But, going back to our interview with Jeff Holder, Mike, looking at, again, cross-culturally, people throughout Europe, people in Iceland, that they are very concerned. Still, even the Icelanders are very concerned with construction being appropriate and not building on land that belongs to the fairies, so belongs to the fair folk. So does that go on in Hawaii as well? Like this idea that, the menehune have to be respected? Certainly you said they help people, but do they also harm people?
Right. Don't put up this resort because the menehune are hanging out here.
Well, I'll tell you, on the Big Island, there's a man who decided to build his property on a known menehune path. And his neighbors, both Hawaiian and non-Hawaiian, were warning him about it. And, the first thing he said was, stupid Hawaiian superstitions. It's my property. I bought it. It belongs to me. I'll build a house. Builds a huge Southern plantation style house. And even the permit guys at the office were telling him once they found out where the house was going to be built. You want to build there? And so he builds it, and about a couple of months later, and this is according to the people who live near him, they hear this big commotion, and you know the sound that a tree makes when it's about to fall? So they hear that, and they hear a crash, and they go running to where the property is. One half of the house has been destroyed and just fallen away. And that happened in broad daylight.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I guess he shouldn't have built there.
That's
Yeah.
right. What about the H3? When the H3 was being constructed, weren't there concerns there of Menehune or other sacred areas that were going to be impacted by the H3?
The H3 is a highway, I assume?
Highway.
Yes.
Yeah. The last one of its kind to be built here. The valley is called Halava Valley, and in our folklore, it's considered to be the birthplace of our two major gods, Papa and Wakea. Wakea is our sky father, Papa is our earth mother. There's also ancient Heiau or Hawaiian temples in the valley that were specifically made for women, female deities.
Ooh, ladies' night.
Yeah. So a lot of powerful places. And in the process of that highway being built, 17 men lost their lives. And even on the day that the tunnel was open and they're going to let people walk through it, there are eyewitness accounts of a mist coming through the tunnel. They could hear conch shells, in the distance, and that they briefly saw a procession of warriors coming through. And so there's countless documented incidents of police officers having to pull people over because, you're not supposed to let your kids jump around in the car. There's only one person driving the car. Vehicles stop suddenly for no reason. Just continuous things, that go on like that. What I wanted to say very quickly is I called to these community meetings where people express their concerns about development in certain areas. And so when it was finally my time to speak, all I said was, I want to thank you developers for doing what you're doing, building on sacred lands, places that are known to be haunted. And I said, and the reason I want to thank you is because as long as you keep doing this, you'll keep me in business. They were not happy.
That's very persuasive.
Yes.
I like it.
What else I find is interesting about this when we're talking about the Menehune interfering with people's development, talking about interfering, that guy's building something and raising hell and havoc, is we do have some kind of interest in little people. Even so, in Wisconsin, we have our own story of the Haunchies that live inside this barn in Muskego, Wisconsin, and there was a tiny village of magical, scary people that were living. San Antonio has a quote unquote like midget mansion that one of our friends told a story about how they would try to sneak in there when they were kids, that they were circus dwarfs who ended up living in a place and wanting to take revenge on San Antonio. Also, the same kind of thing in Cincinnati, Ohio. There's an area outside of Cincinnati they used to call Tiny Town that were like small houses, and kids would play there. And there was another idea that was a circus dwarf development outside, like a village living outside of Cincinnati, where all of these legends, though, come down to the same thing. There's little people out there that are either messing with stuff or up to no good, or things like that. And the idea that we just have this obsession with little magical people, whether it's going to be a leprechaun or the midget mansion or the Menehune or the elves in Iceland, where it's like we can't build there because the elves are there. What? The elves need to come to the community meeting. But like they need to vote for their city council here. But that whole idea of connecting that as, what I really find fascinating is that these stories, and a lot of the stories you told us today, Lopaka, which number one, thank you for your time. It's been fascinating.
Mahalo.
Number two, all around the world, people have similar kinds of fascinating, interesting paranormal stories. And the fact that we can find so many similarities between cultures, just that leads me to believe that we should pay attention, because legends and myths always have those nuggets of truth somewhere built, deep in there. And I think we can learn a lot from them.
Absolutely. I'll loosely translate something from Hawaiian that my mother told me years ago. And it's almost Buddhist in the way that she said it. She said, people are so busy looking for the magic that happens around them. She says, the magic is inside you. she said, once you can manifest that, magic outside of you happens naturally.
That really has some resonance for me, Lopaka. I appreciate you saying that. And I wondered too, I mean, I think there's a lot of meaning, a lot of teachings that we can derive from ancient cultures, such as the Polynesian culture. And I wondered if there's any ancient teachings or traditional Hawaiian beliefs that you think are important or should be important to the modern world right now.
There is one, what we call it, a olelo no eo, or a Hawaiian proverb. And it basically says, Aya keola ka olelo, aya kamake ka olelo, which means in the spoken word there is life, and in the spoken word there is death. And so in my family, it was always emphasized that you have to be careful about how you speak to people, what the intent is in the word that you say, because once the word leaves your body, it's a living thing. And it affects the way another person thinks, feels, about themselves, or how they interact with other people. And in that olelo no eo, in that proverb, is basically the lesson of respect. That according to my mother, every human being is worthy of respect because it's inherent within them, and you have to show that to them. Once you afford even a stranger the slightest mode of respect, only good things can happen. And my mother said, do not be mad at the person because they're Japanese, because of the bombing of Pearl Harbor, because that one Japanese person is not responsible for it. You cannot hold one person responsible for the actions of other people. And she said, don't be mad at your brother because, he did this. He's your brother. And you can't hold him responsible for the actions of his friends. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Okay. Absolutely. And I could you repeat that Hawaiian proverb again in the native Hawaiian?
Aya keola ka olelo, aya kamake.
And that means in the spoken word there is life, and in the spoken word there is death?
Yes, because we had no written language, Hawaiians firmly believed that the word was a living thing, because everything was passed down through oral tradition. And so really, we don't call our stories myths or legends. It's known as oral traditions that have been passed down. And so just like your ancestors, the both of you, when you talk to me about your ancestors, I don't consider them as past tense because they're still with you. No matter where you go, someone from your family is still with you, like even right now.
That's great radio, Mike. He just looked behind him with a terrified stare.
Well, I think that's...
Was that Grandma?
I think it's Grandma's thinking about me.
But that was beautiful. And I think going forward, if as people, we can bring in more beliefs than just, Western beliefs, which seem to cut us off, like as I was saying, reductionist, materialist. When you think about reductionism, you're reducing yourself. That's what you're really doing. When you ascribe to these typical Western beliefs of today, and I think when you look to traditional cultures, there's certainly things in there that you can really open yourself up to enrich your life, and then in turn enrich the lives of others and the planet itself.
Absolutely.
And if you want to enrich your life by going on Lopaka's tour, where can our audience find you when they decide to visit Oahu and go on the Mysteries of Hawaii? Where can they find you?
mysteries-of-hawaii.com.
Okay, and we will have that link in the show notes so that you guys can go there and check it out at othersidepodcast.com/136. We have a link to Mysteries Hawaii. Jev, anything else where you want to send people or places where they can go to find you?
Well, go to the Facebook fan page. That's Mysteries of Honolulu.
Okay.
And we're updating it constantly.
Okay, well, we're going to have links to all of that in the show notes. So you guys be able to click on, you're going to be able to see Lopaka, bother him. And definitely bother him when you go to visit Hawaii and take the mystery
make him
tour.
talk to you because he's incredible.
And we want to thank you for your time today. Absolutely. I hope you end up enjoying the rest of your day. We appreciate you taking a couple hours to talk with us.
Well, thanks for trusting me. I appreciate it.
That's all fantastic. So Have a great day and aloha.
Aloha.
So make sure you check the show notes to find out when you go to Hawaii, you are going to want to take the Mysteries of Hawaii tour and meet Lopaka in person for yourself.
I think I'm just going to have to go to Hawaii just for that, actually.
Yeah.
So I've got to get that on my radar.
Yeah, we do a paranormal pub crawl from Oahu.
Indeed.
So for the song this week, one of the things we were inspired by in the conversation was the fact that Lopaka had been shot twice on the TV show Hawaii Five-0. He's like, yeah, both the times I was a murder victim. And he talked about that in the interview. So one thing he's got to be is a good-looking corpse.
And that's this week's song, Good Looking Corpse, from the album Loser of the Year.
Well, I'm so bored that I could die, but at least I'd leave a good-looking corpse of their postmodern poster child. They say he didn't feel a thing, but it didn't mean a thing. We're all looking for a reason. We love to kill ourselves like Many Plath or Hemingway. Hey, put on my best black turtleneck, smoke a dozen cigarettes and raise my eyebrows all day. Give me drugs, give me sex, give me booze, help me forget that there's nothing new under the sun. Make me deaf, make me dumb, any way to make me numb, 'cause there's nothing new under the sun. Under the sun. Just a glamorous little junkie that was a little freak, a little funky. Well, yeah, good-looking corpse is what I'll be. Old rock stars never die, we just OD. We just OD. We're all looking for a reason. We love to kill ourselves like Many Plath or Hemingway. Hey, put on my best black turtleneck, smoke a dozen cigarettes and raise my eyebrows all day. Give me drugs, give me sex, give me booze, help me forget that there's nothing new under the sun. Make me deaf, make me dumb, any way to make me numb, 'cause there's nothing new under the sun. Under the sun. Make me deaf, make me dumb, any way to make me numb, 'cause there's nothing new under the sun. 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 Under the sun.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. You can find us online at othersidepodcast.com. Until next time, see you on the other side.
Hey, everybody, thanks for listening. One last thing, we wanted to thank our Patreon, Dr. Ned, for
Thanks,
all of his
Doc.
great support and for his suggestions for fun places to go in haunted New Orleans.
And also thanks to our patron, John, who suggested that we visit
Jean Lafitte's,
Jean Lafitte's blacksmith shop.
the oldest. They say it's the oldest bar in New Orleans.
Yes, and we did head down there, and it was very cool and very old.
Yeah. If you guys would like to become part of the greatest paranormal podcast, pop culture, rock and roll community that ever exists on the planet, OtherSidePodcast.com/donate is where you can join the fun.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great week.
Do it.
Paranormal. The paranormal.
Little windscreen.
This should make it better. Paranormal. Okay. The paranormal. I can't talk now.
Oh, yeah.
That's a bumpy road.